From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's today's lineup. K-State's Dan O'Brien will size up the USDA's 2021 crop production and world grain supply and demand reports released this week, and the short and long-term market implications of those new numbers. Then K-State's Chip Redmond will be Mike's side to recount the year in Kansas agricultural weather in 2021, based on the data gathered and compiled by the Weather Data Library here at K-State. Chip talking about the standout weather developments month by month and how production agriculture was impacted. And he'll stick around to offer his regular weekly outlook on what's to come weather-wise to finish out the month of January. All that straight ahead on this Agriculture Today. Welcome once more to Agriculture Today and our Friday edition. Thanks for joining us. It's on to the grain markets as our opening fare, and we visit once again with Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. He's along with us from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. And naturally, Dan, we would talk at length here about the USDA crop production and world grain supply and demand reports out this past Wednesday. Maybe not the dramatic developments that some might have perceived those to be. So let's get into those and what sorts of things you were observing first off.
Well, I think the best comment I heard out of that from a respected market analyst was that, well, that wasn't too bad. In that the USDA ended up and raised the amount of U.S. corn production from last year. And I think it's projected now at 15 billion, 115 million bushels, and it was 15 billion 60. There were some thoughts that they might lower that too. And, anymore our pattern is to go ahead and make changes like this and then watch the quarterly stocks, and then come to the September report. If there's any adjustment to be made, then we whack 80-some million bushels off or something of those numbers. So anyway, we'll watch and see how that goes. But I think the numbers now are what we're planning on. Again, unless there's some surprise out of the USDA, we'll now develop our balance sheets for this coming year with a 15.115 billion bushels of corn. For soybeans, we'll be plugging in 4.435 billion bushels. And again, that's up a little bit. The wheat numbers have been pretty well set for a while. So now we go forward and we start really watching the usage numbers for the supply demand balance sheets. There were some international things to watch. Argentina wheat, again, improved yields reflecting late season timely rains, which is interesting. They've got some dry areas, some wet areas down there. For soybeans in Argentina and Paraguay, dry, hot conditions threatening those crops. You hear a lot of talk in the trade, and some of it's hyperbole, no doubt, but a lot of damage in Paraguay, apparently, and in parts of Argentina. Brazil, in the southern part of Brazil, some damage from hot, dry weather, but generally not bad, if not downright good conditions to the north. So you've got a balancing act going on north versus south. And then we don't watch cotton so much on this show, but cotton's important to Kansas. And in Australia, you've got abundant rainfall favoring a large crop there. So overall, you've got some things coming and going. I just would hop over into the corn supply demand balance sheet and doing a fast survey of the big changes that came into play. You did see the USDA reduce the estimate of Brazilian corn production by 3 million metric tons and raise Ukraine by 2. So almost a net wash in that. For U.S. corn, the USDA did raise food, seed, industrial usage. Most of that was ethanol, up 75 million bushels. No change in feed residual use. Exports were dropped 75 million bushels. And again, that's consistent with the trends that you and I have been talking about, a little bit slower than had been anticipated. On the wheat balance sheet, not a lot of changes in the world numbers. However, what's really noticeable, extremely noticeable, is the drop-off that's happening in projected ending stocks. And that's just the world numbers. And, we try to follow the world minus China numbers. Those numbers, by my own calculations, are about 21.7, 22%, something like that. And that's the lowest we have going all the way back to 2012-13. So here we're trending downward in terms of available exportable world supplies, and ending up with worries about dry conditions in the United States, particularly in hard red winter wheat areas, hard red spring, white, durum, you name it, all concerns in the coming year, both in the U.S. and in Canada. And oh yes, by the way, we've got the tightest world minus China stocks that we have going back at least a decade. So tight situation.
And in that situation, though, the USDA did pare back its export projections for U.S. wheat.
Yes, it did. And I think that just follows the pattern that we've seen so far, where, again, on the one hand, we're saying worldwide things are tightening up, but in the U.S., we saw the USDA drop the projection basically from 840 million bushels for this current marketing year down to 825. Still not just terrible, not below 700 million bushels, but in our better years, when we're really going well, we're close to a billion bushels, 1.1, 1.2. And I think it's a high price phenomena largely. And if problems develop around the world, then yes, here's the U.S. as a residual supplier of last resort. They have to ship with higher costs to get it out of the U.S. off to these other markets in the Middle East and whatever. But still, our supplies are there. So we'll see where all that goes. It's probably a bigger question, a bigger issue in terms of domestic millers and where they can get the quality of crop that they need. I would also add in for soybeans that USDA did drop Argentine soybean production by 3 million metric tons down to 46.5, and Brazilian by 5 million metric tons down to 139. And really, that's the big news in this report, is the adjustments that, because of dry conditions we've had in South America. So they made those changes, and then, oh yes, almost the same way they did for wheat. Then yes, by the way, we did drop U.S. soybean exports by 215 million. Well, excuse me, they didn't change the export number, but we are down year over year by 215 million. So it's a conundrum of a deal. And you stand back and look at this, Eric, and we see all those numbers. But so at the same time, we see the USDA being judicious in lowering U.S. export numbers for these major crops, but the places that would be supplying these grains and oil seeds otherwise, well, they're struggling. So it really opens up the opportunity for some catch-up, panicky buying later on if the problems that we're seeing right now in the world are exacerbated, particularly in South America or Ukraine, you name it, and the world has to come calling. So quite a thing to have happening. At the same time, we've got fertilizer issues and other inflation issues going on for crop production here in the United States. And it just is really setting us up, I think, for a really roiling, volatile March, April, May, June, as we start getting out in the field, try to get fertilizer at a reasonable price, try to get crops going. And oh yeah, by the way, overseas, they might be short of having adequate supplies to supply world needs, and whatever stocks we have left, then we could see callers come looking for those.
And it seems, Dan, that of course a lot of things going on here, but this will all tie back, at least the volatility to come, to the weather gyrations. You mentioned South America in the case of corn and beans, but that's going to take over at some point here as a predominant factor, if it hasn't already, isn't it?
Yes, if it hasn't already. Again, it's already been in as early as the January report. The USDA has chopped 5 million metric tons off of Brazil and 3 off of Argentina for soybeans. So, and again, if dry conditions persist, then you have the possibility of that dry southern area, if that expands in a La Nina year into parts farther to the north in Brazil, then you're affecting the second crop corn that gets planted after soybeans are taken off. So we'll see where all that goes. But it sounds like I'm cheerleading for drumming up the market. So I'm not wanting to do that, but I do want to recognize the risks out there. And there's some real risks as we see this. And it's just so telling to see us on the one hand cut U.S. export prospects for some of these major crops. And oh yeah, by the way, we're also cutting supplies in the other countries that would be making up those exports in the place of the U.S. So we're coming to a time where those countries are going to have to produce whatever they have and fill those needs. And if not, then those countries they'll have to come in large part to the U.S. to make up the difference. And that would be quite the market out into the summer of 2022.
And as a parting thought, as you are conducting several of these grain marketing workshops around Kansas, you're in the midst of that series right now, any sage advice for producers on managing that price risk moving forward, given that volatility is fully expected?
Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen
Right.
in terms of these markets. And we've got risks and heightened risks really this year. And add into that a political election, even though it's just a midterm, whatever moves leading into that could affect the economy. Let's hope we don't see price controls or something like that get thrown out. That would really roil the world. But our goal in these marketing workshops, have a meeting in Erie on Monday, the 17th. People would be invited to come do that. That's down southeast Kansas. We can at least try to be informed and set reference prices and some type of a logical plan. On the one hand, if we see prices move to the high side, well, yeah, let's sequentially market into that. But if we don't, then what can we do to just not be a victim to prices going the lower side? That might be a basis contract, that might be an option of some type, et cetera. So what we're trying to do in that is help people have logical, constructive, thought out plans to deal with the uncertainty in the market, particularly as we come through these spring and early summer planting and crop development seasons.
We would highly encourage you producers to take part in one of these Winning the Game grain marketing workshops. There are still several on the docket for the weeks ahead, and you can find out the full information on dates, locations, and other logistics at agmanager.info. Dan, many thanks, and we'll touch base again next Friday.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
That from Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien of K-State on this part of Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today continues now, and this time we take to reflect on the year 2021 once again from the weather activity vantage point here in the state of Kansas. For we brought over to visit with us Chip Redmond. Chip is a meteorologist with K-State Research and Extension, and as you know, he's involved with the Weather Data Library here at the university. 2021, not surprisingly, Chip, for Kansas, had all sorts of variety to it. Looking clear back a year ago to January, what a mix of things.
Yeah, last winter we were in drought. We had developed drought very similar to this year. We developed drought in the fall, and we finally got some moisture in January. We had a big wind event that came through middle of the month that kind of brought a mixture of everything, a lot of wind and a lot of dust, similar to what we had in December, but obviously not near that magnitude. And then that system finished off with a couple inches of snow in January, and that took the highlight for the month, even though it didn't have extreme cold or warmth with it, but it was really the preface to what was going to become a very, very cold February.
And all manner of record low cold temperatures were set.
Yeah, it was not a pleasant February, focused especially in the middle of the month there around Valentine's Day. We were in a really long cold snap. It ended up lasting from basically the 5th to the 21st was the overall. And some places in northern Kansas never got above freezing for that period. And some places spent many days below zero. And so we set just a ton of records and monthly records. We only broke about 10, but those were all-time record coldest temperatures. And so we broke a lot of daily records, but when we're breaking all-time record cold for some locations, that's impressive. And we measured wind chills as cold as -45 in the Northwest, and that is unprecedented. We recorded temperatures as cold as -29 degrees without the wind, and that's approaching the coldest record in the state.
Right. It was awful, to put it succinctly. But when we moved into the month of March, obviously temperatures mitigated some, and we had some moisture roll in finally.
Yeah, we had a little bit of moisture with that cold snap in February, but going into March, we still had that prevalent drought across the state, and we ended up with over 200% of average precipitation for the month, which is excessive almost. And thankfully, a lot of it was focused in the western part of the state where they doubled and even tripled their average precipitation for the month. March is a transition season, so it's usually on the drier end of the spectrum when we look at the wetter months of May and April. but we eliminated almost all drought in the state of Kansas. And we set the stage for a pretty good amount of moisture in the ground going into the growing season and planting season. And that helped grasses grow and helped that wheat get a boost.
Which was a good thing because in April, actually, moisture pared back from the norm.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect it climatologically, but yeah, we dried out pretty much most of April. We did have a cold snap, mid-month that dropped some snow across much of northern Kansas, and it brought temperatures as low as 15 degrees. So any folks that stuck in the field early were pretty nervous. But thankfully, it was a pretty short cold period. We only broke a few records, so we weren't extreme in that sense. But that cold snap with about 6 inches of snow in places really caught folks off guard in April.
When May came around then, back to a heavier moisture pattern and some severe weather to accompany it at times.
Yeah, we broke a record. The National Weather Service office in Wichita covers most of south central Kansas, and they hadn't recorded a tornado in over a year and a half. That's incredible for Kansas standards. Now, we did have some severe weather. There was a Selden tornado in the northwest and some smaller tornado events. Thankfully, nothing widespread and destructive tornado-wise. We did have a couple wind events that were pretty notable as well. But overall, even though we had a return of severe weather, that's our climatological maximum of severe weather in May. And we were still slightly below average, but that week in around the 16th of May was pretty high impact with severe weather almost every day.
But the moisture totals and locations were impressive to excessive.
Yeah, Natoma area along the Paradise Creek had flooding, and we also had a really heavy rain event in Tribune that set the second all-time highest daily total for precipitation in Tribune.
5.5 inches at Tribune in one day, which is not normal for that.
No, and I think I have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure the previous record was in the 30s at some point. So it's not very often you see it. The good thing is they didn't have much flooding as a result, not nearly to what the folks further north and east of there in Natoma had to deal with.
But the weather pattern stuck around through the better part of June, didn't it?
Yeah, going into June, we were concerned about warm temperatures, but thankfully a lot of the precipitation and just general storminess, it wasn't we didn't have severe weather in June. We had several events, but we didn't have we had no tornadoes recorded in June, and we averaged almost 20 tornadoes in that month. And so mostly just rain, up to 5 to 7 inches of rain, especially portions of the Flint Hills were associated with some of that wind.
Yeah. Into July then, where it was a cool down, which is atypical for that part of the year, of course.
Yeah, the very first day, I believe, in July was very hot. But then after that, we averaged colder. Out of 127 years of data, we were the 38th coldest. And that became a concern when we start looking at our crops, as we just were not getting the growing degrees we needed. And the cloud cover was hindering the growth, too. So crops are starting to fall behind.
And then when August checked in, more violent weather, if you will, here and there, which caused some rather significant crop issues.
Yeah, August, it was a warmer than normal month, and we really just had spotty storms, but they were high-impact storms. We had 2 different episodes in the central part of the state that resulted in significant wind and hail in places that impacted crops as well as buildings and even trains.
The train rolled in Rice County from those winds. That was an eye-catcher to be sure. So as we look then at the fall, Chip, and again, against the norm, heavier rainfall in September.
Yes and no.
Okay.
We had a much welcomed rainfall beginning of September that led to heavy rain, excessive rain in places. But the ground was so dry, it soaked it all up. And we really didn't see long-term benefits of that moisture. It helped short-term, but that was the first glimmer of potentially what we could be going into in the fall of, we got moisture, but it got absorbed right away, evaporated quickly, and we were dry for the most part the rest of September. We did have another rain event in the end of September that kept folks optimistic, really helped the wheat folks out, also kept some folks out of the field for harvest, but it was bookended by rain events, but very dry in the middle of September.
And thankfully there was moisture at some point in September because October well, it stayed relatively warm for the better part of the month, but with fairly minimal moisture.
Yeah, October had a little bit of timely moisture, but the bigger story was really the temperatures. We had an early freeze in the far northwest, but after that, it got really hard to find cold temperatures. And usually we record our first freeze for most of the state in October, and we just never got it. The growing season just kept on chugging along. Wheat started to grow by quite a bit, and some places didn't record a freeze at all for much of central and eastern Kansas in October.
Which set us up for November, and now we're more familiar with present-day conditions because the dryness really became evident in that month.
Yeah, we really kicked it up a notch with breezy, warm conditions, especially towards the end of the month where we started hitting record high temperatures almost once or twice a week. And that really fueled the drought. We saw drought expansion fairly substantially in the west. We saw our first introduction of severe drought as well. So we had that freeze that we didn't have in October finally, or to start the month around the 13th. But then it was just incredibly warm to finish November.
And that then brings us to the final month of 2021, December, which will be forever remembered because of that extremely vigorous windstorm that blew through that one infamous day, December 15th.
Yeah, to finish November, we really set the stage with those warmer, drier conditions that persisted into December, and we literally evaporated all surface moisture for much of the state. And then when we introduced 80, 90 mile an hour winds with that deep, strong storm system that moved across western Kansas and into south central Nebraska, man, we moved a lot of dirt that day. I think every road in western Kansas, west half of Kansas was closed. We obviously had the wildfires, which were high impact in a localized area. And we even had severe thunderstorms to go along with it. We had everything but snow. And we're still assessing just how severe conditions really were. And trying to put it in historical perspective has turned into quite a challenge because it's very rare we see 100-mile-an-hour winds that are not associated with a thunderstorm. And the warmest December on record, 127 years, it was the warmest. Those impacts are going to be felt for much to come, I think.
We appreciate this retrospect, but if you'd hold on, we'll, after the break, talk about what's ahead for our weather in Kansas here in the coming days and maybe beyond. Chip Redmond, he is the meteorologist for K-State Research and Extension, and we'll be back with Chip's weekly segment on Kansas agricultural weather shortly here on Agriculture Today. We're back now on Agriculture Today. And again with us is K-State Research and Extension meteorologist Chip Redmond, who just gave us a quick look back at the year in weather in Kansas in 2021. But now let's talk about what's ahead, Chip. Obviously, the dryness that finished out the past year is with us yet. The latest drought monitor, has it shown a worsening situation from last week?
Yeah, unfortunately, it does. The extreme conditions in the southwest are going to expand a little bit to the north and east thanks to some other impacts. And we saw moderate and abnormally dry expand further east as well into the Flint Hills and finishing out really the rest of central Kansas. We just continue to get warmer than normal temperatures. We did have a cool down that helped ease things, and we had some precipitation, but that south central and central part of the state missed out on much of that precipitation. And so we had just another week of growing drought in Kansas.
And what little snow has fallen since the last time we visited has not amounted to a thing, basically, right?
Some places had 6-7 inches of snow, but there was just very little moisture within that snow. And it blows around a little easier and unfortunately doesn't do a whole lot for us long term.
And temperatures, well, they're not out of the ordinary for winter in Kansas, have they been?
No, we started January off really cold. More average, which is a shock to your system after the record warmest December. But we've turned a little warmer this week. We're going to cool off a little bit for the weekend and then warm back up to start next week. And then maybe some more cooler than normal temperatures to finish out the month.
But is there anything back on the moisture side that is setting up that would be any kind of aid in the relative near future? Maybe not next week, but will this pattern start to shift in any way in the coming weeks?
Well, we're going to be slightly cooler than average to finish out the month, and that usually means northwest winds in Kansas. And unfortunately, that isn't a direction that's very favorable for moisture, because we really need to tap into that Gulf moisture from the south. And with northwest flow, it basically keeps that moisture source cut off for us, and therefore we stay dry. So we'll be cooler, but we'll be continued dry. Now, that doesn't mean we won't see any moisture. This weekend, we expect the potential for a storm in the eastern part of the state. I don't think it'll be very high impact for 90% of the state, but some folks might see a couple inches of snow, might squeeze out a couple tenths of an inch. But the eastern part of the state tends to average more moisture than the west, and so that'll help meet our expectation for this week. But overall, I think everyone will be below average precipitation-wise when we finish out January. And that's saying quite a bit, because January is one of our driest months of the year.
And temperature-wise, to close out the month of January, what's ahead these next 2 weeks?
Yeah, with that northwest flow, we'll be cooler than normal to finish out the month. And to start February, I don't foresee the colder temperatures sticking around very much into February. I think we'll see that high pressure in the west, where there's still prevalent drought, build back, and we'll see warmer temperatures and more of a southwesterly wind flow that will be favorable for continued dryness, and we start to look at temperature swings a little bit bigger in February, as well as probably some warmer temperatures and increasing wind events.
But no repeat of the ice box that we enjoyed in February of 21. Doesn't sound like
Well, I am a meteorologist, and you can't hold that against me. Right now, the odds of another ice box February are pretty slim. I wouldn't say they're non-existent, but they're pretty slim. We definitely are seeing a signal for warmer than normal temperatures through the month of February. And it'll be colder to our north, which will keep us that gradient, but we might see some cooler temperatures at times, but I think warmer than normal is going to rule out to finish February.
Chip, thank you as always. We appreciate the extended visit, and we'll talk again later. Have a good weekend.
Yep, you too.
He's Chip Redmond, meteorologist, K-State Research and Extension, on Kansas agricultural weather. And that is our time for today and the week. Thanks to you as well for being along with us. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.